Welcome to the fourth presentation of the East Caribbean Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Virtual Health Week. Tonight, as we learn about the prevention and management of one of the most prevalent non-communicable diseases, we urge you to remain with us as we conquer our health challenges in 2020. We welcome our members from Dominica, Barbados, the Caribbean, and world by extension. May our visitors receive a special blessing. Welcome and stay healthy.
Our scriptural comfort is taken from the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and we are reading verses 16 to 18. And it reads, "For which cause we faint not, but though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." Amen. At this time, we're going to bow our heads as we pray. Heavenly Father, indeed, you are God and there is none like you. And so we are so grateful for the opportunity and life, whereas you have spared our life throughout the course of the day. And we are here this evening to listen to yet another insightful topic, one of cancer. We know that this world that we are living in, cancer is plaguing our society. And there is a mother, a father, a husband, a wife, a boy or girl suffering from this illness. And so we ask that you will draw divinely close to them and comfort them. We also pray that we will be a source of strength and support to those who are ailing, because you have said in your word, "Blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted." This evening we have Dr. Graves speaking to us. We want to thank you for the knowledge that you have imparted unto her, so that she can share with us, so that we can be better equipped to deal with this disease and that we can also control it. And we want to pray that as she delivers it for this evening, that all of us will benefit from this session.
Dr. Natalie Graves is an academic general practitioner whose practice provides community-based palliative care. She is a lecturer in public health and coordinator of the MPhil PhD program in public health in the Faculty of Medical Sciences at the University of West Indies, Cave Hill campus. Natalie is an alumna of UWI herself, being awarded her MBBS in 2002 with honors in surgery, receiving the Barbados Medical Practitioners Lionel Stewart Award for Excellence in Surgery. In 2005, she was the recipient of Barbados National Development Scholarship and Shakespeare Day Hospice Research Scholarship, both in palliative care. In 2013, she obtained her PhD in primary health care management with a focus on palliative daycare from Warwick Medical School, United Kingdom. And in 2014, she completed the National Cancer Institute's summer curriculum on cancer prevention and control. Most recently, in May 2019, She completed the palliative care education and the practice course at the Center for Palliative Care, Harvard Medical School. Natalie was a founding director of the Barbados Palliative Care Association 2011, chair of the National Advisory Committee on Chronic Pain Management with the Ministry of Health, Barbados 2011 to 2018, and section lead for the palliative care for the Barbados National Cancer Control Rapid Action Plan in 2015 to 2018. Natalie has had the privilege as serving qualitative researcher at the George Allen Chronic Disease Research Center for 2017 to 2018. Her current research with the UE is in the area of non-communicable diseases and largely explores cancer control, survivorship, palliative care, and the alleviation of pain and suffering. She has the good fortune of currently collaborating with colleagues from UE, Mona, Harvard University, University of North Carolina, University of Miami, and Northern Caribbean University. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I present to you Dr. Natalie Graves.
What can I give? What can I bring that will be pleasing to my King? I'll give my heart, not just a part. I'm lifting up my everything. Well, it's all I have to offer, and it's all I have to give. Two hands, one heart, one life to offer you. Two hands, one heart, that's what I'll give to you. Use me today, I know you can. Lord, I surrender to your plan. You made these hands, you made this heart. Take me and make me as I am. Well, it's all I have to offer, and it's all I have to give. Two hands, one heart, one life to offer you. Two hands, one heart, that's what I give to you. Little becomes a lot when it's in your hands. Take me and make me more like you. Well, it may not seem like much, but with the master's touch, I know that I'll be more like you. Oh yes, I will. I've got two hands, one heart, one life to offer you. Two hands, one heart, that's what I'll give to you. That's what I'll give to you.
Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Sister Pivot and the organizers of this Health Emphasis Week for having me on your program. As would have been mentioned before last night by Sister Graves, the topic that I'm going to be covering is really around cancer prevention and, importantly, the mechanisms of cancer control. So for most of us, we may know someone who has a diagnosis of cancer, we may be facing a diagnosis of cancer ourselves, or in the future, the very near future, it's very likely that we will be called to assist someone. So we want to spend some time this evening, not a lot of time, we want to spend some time this evening trying to make sure that we understand cancer, understand its significance, and more importantly, understanding what we can do to better our lives in terms of preventing cancer, and also if we have it, how we can actually control it. I want to encourage you to take notes because I'm going to be sharing slides, so you're not going to be seeing me again. I'm going to start to share my screen, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to have, at the end of this week, some conversation, some chats about any questions that you would have had. So while I change over my screen, you grab a piece of paper, a notebook, pen, etc., so that you can take advantage of what we will share. Okay, so it was nice seeing you. I'm going to say bye because you're going to see the screen, the slides, PowerPoint slides from now on. Okay. Okay, let's begin. So in order for us to really have a good, solid understanding of cancer, we need to think about what we already know about cancer, challenge ourselves as to whether those particular things are true, and then we're going to build a construct about what cancers are, what cancer is, or what cancers are. Then we're going to look at some statistics. They're not very dry and boring, but they are very important in that they help us to understand why we need to prioritize thinking about cancers and treating cancers. And then we're going to look at elements of cancer control in terms of prevention, early detection, how cancers can be treated, and very briefly, we'll talk about a little bit about palliation. Okay? So most of the time when people think about cancers, they tend to think about the end stage, and they tend to think about images that maybe are constructed because of the movies that we watch or some of our own experiences, but mainly pertaining to the latter stages. So we tend to think about pain, persons, quite frankly, think about death, they think about suffering and so forth. But I wanted to take a step back and try to understand this disease from its beginning. So essentially how we're made up, and I know that I'm speaking to persons in Barbados and Dominica, we are made up as human beings, the way how God has made us, we are made up, at our basic level, we're made up of cells. And these cells are very organized. They have particular roles, they have functions, they have almost like computer-like systems that tell these cells what to do. Now, because of sin and suffering, and I really believe that is part of the reason why we don't have access to the tree of life, because our cells, because of sin, can become damaged. The control mechanisms may not always work. So usually what happens, and you can follow my little arrow, if a normal cell becomes damaged for whatever reason, the cell gets a message to say you're damaged, you can no longer continue in the same way, you cannot be repaired, and so the cell is supposed to be destroyed. It closes in on itself almost and allows itself to be destroyed. However, what happens with cancer cells is that when a cell becomes cancerous, the cell, if it becomes damaged, does not want to close in on itself and die. It says, oh yeah, I want to be immortal. I want to go on living forever. I want to make other cells that look like me and that behave like me. And I don't want to be controlled by anyone or anything. Reminds us a little bit about like sin, really. So what we realize is that this pathway of avoiding, these cells avoiding destruction is very complex. So way back in 2000, a fairly dated paper now, scientists worked very hard to try to figure out how it is that these cells can avoid the process of this natural suicide that is supposed to occur, and how it is that they're able to grow, and how it is that they're able to spread to other parts of the body. And some of the things that we realize is that they try to draw blood vessels to themselves. They try to replicate themselves or reproduce themselves in an immortal way. They try to invade other areas to kind of like almost escape, control, etc. But we have been studying more and more to figure out if we can figure out how these cells try to avoid cell death, then you can maybe figure out how to target them more efficiently and to achieve their destruction. So from 2000, there's a more recent update, 2011, which emphasizes a couple things. This is a very busy slide, and I just want to step back, one step back. So one of the things that cells do, cancer cells do, is that they try to produce inflammation that kind of surrounds them and acts almost like in a very simplified way as a protective mechanism. They try to make the DNA unstable, the fundamental programming of the cells unstable. They try to cause confusion in the immune system so that your immune system does not, one, recognize them, or two, try to be able to destroy them. And then they change the way how the body uses energy. Sometimes they speed it up for their benefit. So most of the drug interventions for, this is again a very busy slide, most of the drug interventions then, I don't want to say drug interventions, medicinal interventions then try to fix this problem, these various problems that these cells do. So say if this particular matted network here in the middle is the cancer cell and a tumor that is behaving abnormally and doesn't want to be destroyed. So say, for example, if the particular cancer cell does not want to be destroyed by the immune system, then there may be medicines that can be given to activate the immune system that say, hang on a minute, something is trying to avoid you, let's boost the immune system. There may be some cancer tumor cells that are trying to cause inflammation to protect themselves. So then the medicine will try to decrease the inflammation so that the tumor can be destroyed, so that the cells that are bunched together forming a tumor can be destroyed. If it is that they're supposed to die over here by this arrow and they want to avoid that, they're dodging it, then there are medications that try to stop that, etc. And likewise, if they're trying to cause production of blood vessels, if they're trying to draw blood to themselves so that they can grow, there may be medications that can be used to stop that. So I want you to bear this in mind, because when we come to prevention and when we come to control, and we think about natural applications, we can think about things then that might boost our immune system, things that can reduce inflammation, things that can stop abnormal blood vessel growth, etc. So God has given a very logical way of understanding how to attack cancers, so to speak. So way back in 2012, which is now 8 years ago, the World Health Organization, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, they would have kind of tried to amplify the messaging around cancer to make sure that persons understood that something was happening in the world causing cancers to be, for there to be a need for cancers to be looked at quite seriously. And it was categorized really as an urgent priority action, because what we realized is that the number of persons having cancers, and more importantly, the burden associated with having a cancer in terms of number of persons who might be ill or persons, unfortunately, who might die, that this was increasing. And what we say is that much of what has been occurring is because of a shift. So 150 years ago, much of the diseases in the world, many of the diseases in the world were caused by infections. And we've gone through what, for those of you who have a public health background and are listening, or who are medical, we will talk about the epidemiologic and demographic shift, meaning the things that people are suffering from, the diseases and the disease risk factors, the things that cause disease have changed over time. So gone is the hookworm and the cholera to a large extent in some countries, or various kinds of infectious diseases. And we've now moved into a stage where many of the diseases that we have are by virtue of our lifestyle. We say, or we speak of the lifestyle and the degenerative diseases that are occurring by virtue of age. That having been said, in brackets, you can put that we do have re-emerging infections that were supposed to be under control that are now coming back. And we also have new infections. We're living in the time of COVID. So COVID was unexpected. So say, for example, right now in America, for the year 2020, the disease that has caused the most deaths has been cardiovascular disease, followed by cancer, and the number 3 is now COVID, a disease that did not, for all intents and purposes, did not exist at the start of 2020. But to focus on cancer, we're saying that a lot of what occurs as it relates to cancer is related to our lifestyle. We really do believe that at least a third of cancers can be prevented if persons can adjust their lifestyle. So what are the cancers that are really important? So this is the Caribbean region. And although we are, it's a very ideal place to live in terms of environment and so forth, beautiful sea, fresh air, compared to other parts of the world, a fairly laid back kind of living, but it's becoming more intense. So when we focus on the Caribbean, unfortunately, our patterns of non-communicable diseases mirror the rest of the world in terms of the heart disease, the diabetes, and the cancers. And I have here circled off onto the right of the slide, just go back a little bit, that we're going to be focusing on Dominica and Barbados in the Eastern Caribbean. 2 very ideal islands. Dominica is known as for its nature isle aspect, very green, very unspoiled. Barbados is known for its wonderful beaches and has been cited as perhaps one of the blue zone areas in the world where people live very long because of the quality of life, although that may shift a little bit. But in essence, these are the statistics and 2018 statistics for Barbados. The Global International Network did not have the ones for Dominica, but PAHO and other statistics would suggest that the 2 kind of echo each other. So when we look at Barbados as compared to the rest of the world, standardized, when we look at the cancers that are occurring most frequently and the cancers that persons are dying from, we'll see that the number 1 is prostate right here, yeah? And I have a little bubble that's going to summarize it for you. So it's prostate for both the highest incidence in terms of the cancer that's occurring most frequently of sorts, if that's a way of thinking of it simply, and the cancer that persons are dying from. So we really need to pay a lot of attention to men's health. The cancer of the prostate is followed by cancer of the breast, and then we have cancer of the colorectum. And I really want to talk about that because there are lots of signs and symptoms that people have, and they don't necessarily recognize it as colorectal disease. And then followed by cancers of the womb. Yeah, so we talk about the body of the womb, and then we talk about the cervix or the neck of the womb. So those are the real top cancers. But to say that the blood cancers, interestingly enough, in Barbados, lymphomas and leukemias, things that are not solid. So this is a cancer that's occurring within the blood itself. Those are also increasing really. So the top cancers for incidence, I just want to go through those again, would be prostate, breast, colorectum, the body of the uterus or the womb where the baby is housed, and then the cervix. But to stick a pin saying, we are seeing higher rates of blood cancers, and we are seeing higher rates of, or increasing rates of some cancers that you really don't like to hear much about, cancer of the pancreas and so forth. Yes? And then when we look at what persons are dying from, we really need to pay attention to the big three: prostate, breast, and colorectum. Okay, right. So this is the summary slide here to just help you to remember that. And then I also want to show you when we break it down for gender. So if we had to look at men versus women, the ones that are important for the men, top three, become prostate, colorectum, and lung. And for women, it becomes breast, the body of the womb, and the cancers of the colon and rectum. So you'll see that cancers of the colon and rectum are important for both men and women. And as I said before, we believe that these statistics are somewhat similar for Dominica as well. Okay, just a little memory slide there for you. And I believe that these slides are going to be shared so you can have this presentation and then use it in your churches and so forth. So what do we really want to focus on tonight as we talk about the control of cancers? We want to focus on the fact for Dominica and Barbados that these cancers are expected to increase. But what do we do? Do we throw up our hands and say, okay, well, the scientists say that these cancers are going to increase, we do nothing? No. What we want to do is to position ourselves within our churches, within our homes, within our families, to think about cancer control. And when we think about cancer control, we think about preventing cancers in the first place. We think about if a cancerous change should be occurring in the body. We think about the ability to detect that change early, which is what we call here early detection. And then we think about ways in which we can treat cancers with information. You can make your own choice. And then if we need to palliate in terms of end stage palliation, how do you achieve that within your respective country? So prevention is huge. As I mentioned before, that a significant number of cancers can be prevented. So let's look at some of the prevention mechanisms. But firstly, as it relates to colorectal cancers, cancer of the breast, cancer of the prostate, the evidence is not so strong in terms of cancer of the prostate as yet. But we do know that nutrition is extremely important. And we also know that the balance of physical activity and how that feeds into obesity is important. So on Sunday night, Dr. Williams would have mentioned some of the risk factors in terms of the number of persons in the Caribbean who are adult persons who are obese, etc. So we know that 1/3 of our children in the Caribbean are overweight or obese. And in some countries, as much as 33 to 41% of adults are also obese or overweight. And what we know for breast cancer, being overweight or obese is going to increase your risk For colorectal cancer, being obese or overweight increases your risk, but also being obese or overweight in conjunction, more importantly, with decreased physical activity also impacts upon your risk. And then we mentioned this before during the course of this week, as it relates to the diet that is consumed, a diet that contains, the scientists will say, excess alcohol. There's no safe limit for alcohol as it relates to increasing the risk of cancers. So you may say for cardiovascular disease, you might say some persons will recommend women drink this much, men drink this much, X or Y. When it comes to cancers, there's no safe limit, yeah? So we know that alcohol consumption increases the risk of those three main cancers that we mentioned as well. So we're talking about prostate, we're talking about colorectal disease, we're talking about breast cancer. So where we see here in terms of prevention, chronic non-communicable disease commission, both the islands of Dominica and Barbados have NCD commissions. And these commissions help to guide our governments and to design interventions that will help us as a population to remain as healthy as possible. So you may have national walks, Healthy Caribbean Wellness Day, emphasis and so forth. And really it's about educating persons about the type of diet that they should be utilizing, which was mentioned last night by Dr. Reed. The same things that help mental health are going to be the same things that will help to reduce your risk of cancer. So I'll just go over some of the things, and then later down in this presentation, we will review those. So if you're taking a note, as scientists, we would recommend persons adopt what we will call a plant-based diet. So you're not going to hear persons talk about necessarily vegan and vegetarian, etc. And this again mirrors some of the information that was shared on Sunday night regarding the DASH diet and various other kinds of diets. But the dietary reform is such that we know that phytochemicals are the chemicals that plants contain are very, very, very useful. So we talk about the cruciferous vegetables. So that would be your broccoli, your cauliflower, kale, lettuce, and various kinds offer some measure of protectivity, but also separate and apart from the phytochemicals, just the fiber in them, particularly for colorectal disease, where the fundamental issue is that you eat something, sometimes that thing may contain a chemical that can damage the cell, and it has opportunity to damage the cell as it passes through the colon as stool is being formed. And what we do know is that persons who have what we will call slow transit times, or persons who are, they take a long time for the stool to pass through the colon, you have more opportunity for just literal, if you want to think about it in terms of contact, you have more opportunity for contact. So you want to be really trying to achieve a good transit time. Stool is not staying in the colon for too long. If there's anything that might be carcinogenic in it, minimum contact time, etc. So it's a simple theory, but it is the one of the baseline theories. So high fiber foods, drinking water, and so forth. But the other major bit of evidence relates to the meats that we use and how we prepare these meats. So what you really want is a diet that is avoiding, and that's a strong word, but that's the word, avoiding processed red meats. So when we say red meats, we're talking about beef, lamb, and pork. So for some persons to just bring that home, that might be avoiding bacon, avoiding salamis, pastrami's, avoiding luncheon meat if it is, if it's based on a red meat, avoiding corned beef, those kinds of things. Things that are preserved with nitrites and that have a lot of salt in them. we know that these things can damage the lining of the colon. What we also know is even if your meat was fresh, your red meat was fresh, and then you charcoal grill it, so this is, you know, what people call it open flame coal barbecuing, some processes for jerking and those kind of things, and how we cook our food in the Caribbean. That can cause the production of certain chemicals when the components from the smoke, etc., and the cooking process interact with the blood that is in the meat, can produce certain chemicals that can then damage the colon. And you know, sometimes we have a process of what we call browning down. At least that's what we call it in Barbados, where you take the sugar and you burn the sugar, you put the oil, then you take your red meat, and this is how I was taught by my mom. You take your red meat, you stir it up with your onions and stuff like that, like a browning. But that also has the potential, especially at high heats with the oil, to produce nitrates, and if it's interacting with the blood in the meat and so forth. So you can see that it is very important for us to be aware, because we could have us and our children eating in this faster paced Caribbean lifestyle, eating maybe some wieners or something, some non-chicken wieners in the morning, and then maybe you're having some mincemeat and some other something made from ground beef, and then you're having another dose of meat prepared in another way in the evening. So we just really want persons to be very aware. So what you're saying is you want to avoid processed red meats. You want to avoid, you want to limit red meats, particularly prepared in certain places, certain ways, sorry. And what you want to do is to focus on those forms of protein that are useful and beneficial, that are not going to come along with the nitrates, the nitrosamines. They're not going to come along with lots of fats and so forth. So you're really talking about your nuts, your peas, your seeds. If you are using meat, then animal products, then you may want to stay more on the side of chicken, turkey, fish, and those kinds of things. And then there's a whole other discussion about fish for another time. Perhaps we get to that in the Q&A on Sabbath. But then you want to also limit things that can expose your body to excess fat, that can also cause you to have difficulty with controlling weight, etc. And then you think about limiting your cheese consumption. So then what is left if you remove all those nice tasty proteins? Well, you have lots of fiber containing foods that might be beneficial, depending on, you know, certain persons have different allergies and so forth. So you want to be thinking about your whole grains. And this goes back to the presentation on Sunday night as well, where Dr. Williams would have shared with you the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate. You may want to reference that and to save it. But also you want to be using, in our context, whole grain corn. So like even if it's yellow corn meal, like what you make cuckoo out of and that kind of a thing, those kinds of things. If you're using rice, you're using brown rice. If you're using breads and cereals, providing no allergies, etc., you're using whole grain as opposed to the refined. And then we spoke about the vegetables. But I also want to emphasize the role of fruits, not to overdo the fruits as compared to vegetables. Fruits don't farm are the serving size for fruits in terms of the proportion on your plate is less, because you still want to control even the consumption of natural sugars to the excess. You don't want to do that. So there's some fruits that are exceptionally good as it relates to cancer control. There is not a lot of evidence, but emerging evidence on fruits that contain lycopenes. So tomato will count as a fruit. Watermelon would count as a fruit that contains lycopenes. What we will call shaddock, the pink shaddock, pink guavas, as well as pawpaw, the pawpaw that is very, very deeply stained reddish hueish, not the pale yellow one. Those are good in terms of lycopenes. And lycopenes seem to, can't be definitive about it, seem to assist with the control of prostate cancer, and with to some extent breast as well. As it relates, but generally you just want to eat a variety. You want to think colors, you want to think about what's in season, etc. But then also I just want to mention those fruits that contain resveratrol, so grapes and so forth. And then we have some fruits within our region that we're not sure what they contain, but they are very deeply hued and could potentially be beneficial. Say, for example, things like jamun, etc. And we mentioned already on Sunday that the beverage of choice would be water. You're not wanting to use lots of added sugars, your sodas and juice drinks, etc., because they will add to excess calorie intake, which will then add to obesity, which then increases your risk for these major cancers. So basically what we're saying is you're wanting to eat as plant-based as possible, as a means of putting valuable nutrients into your body, but also as a means of controlling weight. And then there are beautiful knock-on effects. So if you are reducing your weight, then you're also reducing inflammatory processes in the body, other changes that can predispose to diabetes and hormonal imbalance. So it's a win-win situation where you adjust your diet such that you can bring your weight under control. So then you will see here under prevention, then you'll see immunization. I know that there are lots of persons who are concerned about vaccines and how vaccines are made, what they contain, etc., etc. And once you have done the necessary research and you have discussed it with your health professional, you can make up your own mind. But we do know that there's sufficient evidence to speak to the fact that vaccines for preventable illnesses are extremely useful. Many of us, we don't have a problem now with things like diphtheria, polio, tetanus, etc., pertussis. We don't have an issue in our region with those things because of the vaccine program. And if you remember the previous slide, we spoke about cervical cancer, or cancer of the neck of the womb, as being still very significant. So we know that at least in most cases, 98%, at least 98% of these cancers are caused by a virus. The virus is the human papilloma virus. There are at least 70 different types of this virus, but there are certain subtypes that are more likely to cause cancerous changes in cells. And then there's some that will cause warts, on the penis, warts on the anus, warts around the vagina, etc. But what we are concerned about is the ones that cause these changes in the cervix that can then lead to cervical cancer. Now, because the womb is inside and you can't see your cervix every day, sometimes changes are occurring and women may not be aware that these changes are occurring. And cervical cancer can be a very, at its advanced stage, it's a very uncomfortable disease, lots of complications and so forth, and it's really not nice. And as scientists, as physicians, if there's something that can be prevented that can stop a person from having unnecessary pain and suffering, then that's what it's about. So this is where the vaccine comes in. It's given to both boys and girls because the virus that causes HPV cervical related cancer can cause other things that can affect boys as well. It would stop them from getting penile, certain kinds of cancers of the penis, cancer of the rectum, cancers of the throat, and so forth. So that's why that vaccine is offered. It's usually offered before a person is sexually active, so that they are prevented. Why? Because the types of virus that cause HPV are so common. Well, like the shouldn't say so common. They are common enough for you to not want to have a person exposed to sexual intercourse without having been protected from these viruses. And there's also a schedule for men. And say, for example, if you are an adult and you want to know, well, have I already been exposed to these viruses that can cause this cervical cancer? You can speak to your doctor about having DNA testing done for this particular type of virus to see if you've already been exposed to it, so that you can then discuss a cure plan. And then finally, in terms of prevention, this one is huge in terms of tobacco control. We know that tobacco is the #1 risk factor for causation of cancers worldwide. This is in particular reference to lung cancer. Just because it doesn't feature high on our list doesn't mean that it's not important to our region. It is. So we don't want to be exposing ourselves to secondhand smoke. And we certainly don't want to consciously be using tobacco in any of its forms, really, because we know that it increases the risk of oral cancers, increases the risk of lung cancer in particular. So to summarize, and I have some pretty slides at the end. When we think about cancer prevention, we have to think nutrition. We have to think about plant-based nutrition. We have to think about physical activity and weight control. We think about the beverages that we consume. We don't want to be consuming alcohol. We want to be swapping that out for water in its various forms, and minimizing our added sugars and so forth. Can't stay away from sugar because sugar is in food, but you want to stay away from your added sugars. You want to be emphasizing plant-based diet where you are using lots of cruciferous vegetables, you're using your fruit, you're limiting your red meats, you're avoiding your processed red meats, you're using peas, nuts, seeds, etc. as your main sources of protein, with allergies and various other things considered, and you're limiting cheese. I want to really encourage persons that if you think that this kind of transition, these kinds of transitions take time, some people can do it with the snap of a finger, others just need time and they need guidance. So if you need time and guidance, get the help that you need, and know that this will have knock-on effects on the control of other non-communicable diseases. So I'm just going to bring in another slide here, right? So governments have been seeking in Barbados, especially to prevent persons from having exposure to secondhand smoke, by having legislation that speaks to no smoking in public places, limiting how persons can purchase cigarettes, and those kinds of things will be part of that whole control mechanism, putting danger warnings on cigarette packages, not selling cigarettes even in small quantities to minors, that kind of a thing. So in terms of detecting, so we're going to move now from preventing to early detection. So perchance there is some change that is occurring. One of these cells is changing its way of operating in your body. You want to be able to detect it early. So for prostate, one of the things that we can do is to do a blood test called the Psa test, which stands for prostate specific antigen. These cells, if they're abnormal, produce higher quantities of a particular kind of carbohydrate that the blood test can pick up. So we really, especially if you have a family history of prostate cancer, there've been men in your family with prostate cancer, or even women with breast cancer, because we know certain family clusters go together. And especially if they've had these cancers at a young age, under the age of 65 in particular, definitely under the age of 50, you want to be starting your PSA screening. There's a lot of controversy when you look at the American literature, etc. But most persons will advise by at least 50 to start having your PSA done. So the thing is, as you increase in age, the prostate does not stop growing. So, it's really about doing the PSA test in a regular and sequential way, as advised by your health care provider, so that you can see any changes in the cell levels in that PSA testing level. Combined with the PSA is something called a digital rectal examination, which many persons might be afraid of or have misgivings about, which is where the doctor uses a gloved, lubricated finger, so it has a gel on it, to examine the prostate for its size and to see how it feels, if it feels hard, if it feels like it has bumps on it that shouldn't be there, to combine that with the PSA to see what might be happening with the prostate. So really and truly men, especially over the age of 50, some persons will argue, especially if you have a strong family history, 40 to 50 to start having your PSA and your digital rectal examination. For women and understanding what's happening with the cervix, we are highly encouraged to keep up with our pap smears, starting at the age of 21. If you've never had coitus before, meaning if you're still a virgin and so forth, you can discuss with your healthcare provider when it is that you start. And certainly take use of having a discussion about combining your pap smear with that test that helps you to know if you have that specific kind of HPV, the troublesome kind, the DNA testing for the HPV. And then we go on to things like mammograms. So mammogram is an invisible form of radiation. It's the form of an X-ray. It's really an X-ray of the breast to see if there are any changes that might signal that cells want to behave badly or have started to transition. This again has some debate. So American literature would suggest that you start at 50. We know in the Caribbean that our incidence, our age at which women get cancers in the Caribbean, in particular the islands that have been studied were Barbados, Trinidad, Bahamas, is much younger than the American population, even the American Black population. So we advise that women consider starting screening from 40. You don't have to have a mammogram every year. You can have it every 2 years, but you should have a clinical breast examination every year. For women who are under 40 or who have very dense breasts, in addition to the mammogram, you may need an ultrasound. And then for both men and women, as it relates to colon cancer and screening for colon cancer, you have varying tests, but the one I want to speak about is the one that allows doctors to see exactly what's happening in the colon and take any tissue samples at the same time, which is a colonoscopy, where you use a very small, thin, flexible tube, which has a light at the end. You're mildly sedated, so you don't feel anything. You might be a little aware, but you're not going to feel anything. And it allows the doctor to visualize the entire colon. And that's extremely important because colon cancer can occur at various parts of the colon. And if there's anything there, a sample can be taken the same time. So usually the age is at 50, you should have your first colonoscopy. And there have been some revisions to this recently, some discussions of revision to this, even to suggest that at age 45. Now, if you have a strong family history, like say, for example, my family, so my first colonoscopy was at 35. So you have to have a discussion and decide how to do these things, because the beautiful thing about colon cancer, if you pick it up early, you can remove any abnormal cells and essentially achieve cure. I'm very mindful of the time. I don't know where the time has gone, but I just want to flip through so that we can talk about diagnosis and treatment. So then we think about colon cancer, breast cancer, any kind of cancer. We have to think about the treatment being offered by a team. And I just have a picture here of the hospital in Barbados and then one of our polyclinics to emphasize that your primary care doctor or your general practitioner or the doctor that sees you in your community can liaise with the hospital to have you seen and assessed as quickly as possible. There are signs and symptoms sometimes that persons may have and they may not recognize it. So say, for example, if you have prostate, any problems with urinating, your stream is not as strong, there may be blood in the urine, back pain. If you find that you're having problems with your ejaculation or blood in the semen when you ejaculate, those are things that will say get checked. They don't necessarily mean prostate cancer, but they certainly mean get checked. If you are a lady and you're noticing a change in the shape of your breast, it's dimpling in, there's a section that's hard, or there's a lump that you can feel, if the nipple has changed, if the skin looks like the skin of an orange, etc. If there's a rash that's not going away, if the breast feels hot and warm, that's something that tells you I need to get checked. If it is that you are having problems with stooling, so sometimes you're constipated, sometimes you're having diarrhea, there may be blood on the stool, bright red blood, separate and apart from any discussion on hemorrhoids. If you're seeing blood, you have to get checked. If the stool is kind of maroon in color, if you're having lots of cramp in your tummy and it's not going away, when you wipe, you see like coal or mucus, those are things that say, I need to get checked. So you can go to your, district health center, etc., and then get the necessary referrals. So the branch of medicine that tends to deal with cancer treatment is called oncology, and different kinds of oncology. And I know many persons are afraid of the medicines that are used to treat cancers. And they may be even afraid of the x-rays or the energy beams that are harnessed to treat cancers. And I would say have a discussion with your healthcare providers to make sure that you're understanding correctly where these medicines come from and how it is that they interact with your body and what you can do to keep your body as strong as possible while you're on these medicines. As a allopathic physician, which is a regular physician that we train as at University of the West Indies, the thinking is that the combination of medical oncology, radiation oncology, in conjunction with lifestyle management is the way to manage cancers. We would not recommend, although the choice is yours, we would not recommend complementary therapies alone. There's not a sufficient body of evidence to recommend that persons do complementary therapies alone. But if persons choose to do complementary therapies alone, that's their choice. But I would always recommend that persons consider what we'll say reducing the tumor burden. So if you can see the cells there that are abnormal, remove them. That can be removal through simple biopsy, removal through taking a larger piece, whatever kind of surgery might be needed. If surgery is possible and you can see the tumor and you can remove it, you can remove it. If it is then that you have to go on to maybe chemotherapy or radiation therapy, that could be considered, but not all cancers are the same. Not all cancers will need the same treatment. If you remember the pretty slide that we had at the beginning, it all depends on how those cancer cells are trying to avoid getting caught. That's what determines. But the allopathic stuff, which is the chemo, the radiation, and so forth, has to go along with a holistic approach. Okay, so remember that you want to be thinking about your fruits and vegetables. You want to be thinking about your fibrous foods. You want to be thinking about folate foods. And I just want to put a plug here for okra, which is very important in our region. And it's an excellent source of folic acid. We want to be thinking about the alliums. So those are like garlic, the chives, what we would call seasonings. Those are very good anti-inflammatory foods, things that contain selenium and the things that contain lycopene. We want to remember our energy balance, so we don't want to put more calories into our bodies than we need. And we want to remain physically active when we are controlling cancers. Physical activity is it is actually the most proven intervention for increasing survivorship in women with breast cancer. So if you have a diagnosis of breast cancer, you really need to be physically active. Coming down to the end, just to say that most of the evidence from our branch of medicine is that the power is in the food, not in the supplements. So we would not emphasize taking supplements. In some instances, certain kinds of supplements can actually cause the cells, the cancer cells, to behave in a way that would not be useful for you. So the emphasis is really on the food, because we really can't say that we understand all of the balances in the balance between the various chemicals in the food and how well they work. But it seems to me that whether it's a combination of the fiber, the water, the various chemicals in the food itself, that is the way to go. So this was quite a long session, but I hope you were able to access the information. And I just want to end off here by saying thank you and showing a picture of the periwinkle flower, just to emphasize and to say that sometimes persons walk away from allopathic treatments, chemotherapy in particular, because they don't necessarily understand where things come from. So this little flower, which we all know, I remember as a little girl, my mother telling me not to touch the white sac that comes out of it, it blisters you. But from this flower, we get a medicine called vinblastine and its neighboring cousin vincristine, which is used to treat brain tumors in children. We also, one of the mainstays of cancer treatments for breast cancer comes from the bark of the Pacific yew tree, and some of it in its synthetic form. But just to say that before you say that, a particular thing is bad, take the time to research it for yourself and then to have a discussion with your practitioner. I want to wish you the very best of health, and just to remind you that if you're faced with the challenge of cancer, or you are a relative or a friend, to hold on to the promises that we find in God's word and hold on to the mechanisms that we see in God's word. We see Jesus using various things to heal people. He who had all power, he healed some people by the word. He healed some people through them touching him, reaching out in faith. He healed some persons by putting mixtures of clay and spittle on their eyes. He used various mechanisms. So in all things, ask God for the wisdom that you need. Continue to have a wonderful night and continue to keep engaging really with these presentations during this Health Emphasis Week. Thank you.
We want to thank Dr. Graves so much for the information that she has shared with us, and want to pray that you will apply the tips that she has told us to our lives so that we can prevent this dreadful disease. To our listeners and our viewers, we want to say thank you so much for joining us. Good night.
Kindly bow your heads with me as we do our closing prayer. Shall we pray? Our loving God and eternal Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. We want to thank you for your goodness and your love towards us. This evening, we want to thank you for the message received. We ask, Lord, that you grant us the enabling power so that we can put these health practices in place, so that we can enjoy a healthy, happy, long lives. We thank you again for everything that transpired here tonight. We thank you for all those who participated in the program. And especially we thank you for the health director and the work she has been doing. Continue to bless our ministry. We pray that you will continue to bless us richly. And we pray when we come in your eternal kingdom that you save us, we pray. For we ask these mercies in Jesus' name. Amen and amen.